I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader and the other in the proposed domination of the author.
Nerdrotic.com.
In the statement from the very inexperienced showrunners, Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne, whose only work has been working for J.R.R. Abrams, doctoring up scripts, and their first and only credit was Star Trek Beyond. Then they were given this show, the biggest show ever. Their second word in describing, second or third word, was diversity. Diversity. So I spent an hour and a half Googling to see if Tolkien had ever used that word. I couldn't find it. I mean in relation to anything, the word diversity. Now, is Middle-earth diverse? Yes, of course. We've got dwarves. We've got men, and the men are probably diverse. We've got the elves. We've got hobbits. But Lord of the Rings was supposed to be a mythology for England. It wasn't even, he didn't set out to write fantasy. He invented the genre, or refined it, if anything. And there's people who are experts, much bigger experts than me, can break this down. Did I expect a lily white cast? No, I did not. Lady Greymaster pointed out it looks like they have the bare minimum, and this is the secondary cast. So the one on the top left you might recognize if you watched Westworld. I can't say I recognize a lot of these people. It could work. My biggest concern is, of course, bad robots involvement. Apparently they're well into filming, and we're supposed to get our first episode in 2022. Hope it's the greatest show ever made, but I don't know if you could make this show now. Based on what I read earlier, based on everything I've heard, and based on what the creatives in Hollywood listen to and what they believe, I don't know if you can pull this show off. A show that was meant to be mythology written by a devout Catholic. Unless they completely ignore everyone. And that's all I've ever, you don't have to listen to me. Don't listen to me at all. Just don't listen to them. And make what Tolkien would want to make. Every move you make, every breath you take, you should be asking, what would Tolkien do? What would Tolkien do in this situation? And I don't want to hear words like fidelity. Spirit is good. You can make changes as long as Tolkien is what you have in mind at first, and not like, oh, we need to insert agenda here. And they want to take this show. The SJWs, the NPCs, the identitarians, they want it. They want to take this down. There will be so many. Lord of the Rings is to white and to this and to that. And we've already had this for years, by the way. If you actually Google J.R.R. Tolkien and diversity, you get a bunch of articles that have a problem with. Here's one. This is one from July. We'll go over it. It's an older article, but we can go over it here. Lord of the Rings, Lack of Diversity and 9 Other Problems with the Series by Amanda Steele. This was July 25th, 2020. The Lord of the Rings series is considered by many to be one of the most influential and best fantasy series of all time, but it does have its issues. Amanda, are you the arbiter of all storytelling? She must be. So let's go over these 10 problems, shall we? Sam is essentially Frodo's servant. Yes, he is. What gave it away? When Sam called him Master or Mr. Frodo? Frodo is richer and is higher class than Sam. Yes, he was. In many ways, Sam sees himself as secondary to Frodo. Yes, he does. And often acts accordingly. And Frodo doesn't always treat him that well. Yes, there is a lot more nuance to their relationship and the themes of friendship in The Lord of the Rings, but it's not unrealistic to see the problematic class structure. This is why storytelling is dying. Because if you find it problematic for a fictional story to represent class or class structures that are fictional based on an older time without that context, then maybe stories aren't for you. I tell you what, fantasy will never work if you try to use modern sensibilities, class structure, or anything, because fantasy, because of Tolkien, was based partially on feudalistic societies, blah, blah, blah. You guys know. And again, this is supposed to be English, and of a certain time. A lot of characters are sexist. But let's just completely forget how Tolkien wrote Éowyn in the 40s. I don't know when he wrote that chapter. I don't know if it was in the late 40s or the 50s, but it was in a time where people were writing chapters like that. But let's blow over that. And by all means, the next war, I want a female lead. Arwen gives up her immortality for a man. Terrible. Absolutely awful. I mean, it's not just any man. It's fucking Aragorn. Using fantasy races as a metaphor for real race relations. One problem that many sci-fi series have is the metaphor for bigotry, especially when it comes to race, are used instead of actually addressing the problem in more direct way. While racial tensions between the elves and dwarves might seem fictional, they can tie into real-world racism, and the way this is handled isn't the best. Really, because I think it's pretty open-ended and subject to interpretation by the reader. So maybe you're racist. I don't know. The existence of orcs. Going off this idea, the very existence of orcs in the series, especially given how the legacy of orcs has been used, has some issues. They are presented as a race of beings that is purely evil, and they are given no autonomy or choice. They are seen as purely monsters, and the words used to describe them are pretty loaded when you dissect them. They're just a bad guy. You know what? I can't get into Tolkien's head, but when I see an orc, I think of, when I was a kid, I thought of a demon. That's all I thought of. I didn't think of any people. And I just see orcs. Are they really fleshed out in the movies? Not really. It's probably more of a class thing than a race thing. There isn't any LGBTQ plus representation. Just going to go right by that one. Okay. Nope, there isn't. There are no main female characters. And then they put Galadriel right there. You know, there used to be a time where it's okay to make a movie for dudes. And it's still okay, in my opinion. Just Hollywood's unwilling to make it. So independent filmmakers out there, go get them, because there's going to be a big opening for you to maybe have a chance, because Hollywood is making less, well, they're taking less creative chances every day. And the more they adhere to bullshit like this, the more opportunity you're going to have to make something that people might still want to watch. Because when I go to Lord of the Rings, I'm not looking for it to be used as anybody's platform. I like the story. Of course, they bring up the Haradrim, and then there aren't any characters of color, which was number one. And then she puts in an orc. What's she trying to say? Well, then let's stop doing murder dramas. Let's stop with, well, fuck fantasy. Forget fantasy. Forget sci-fi. Let's just have everybody in gray onesies. They're all gender fluid, and they're all sitting at a table talking about nothing. That's what art's going to be from Hollywood anyway.
If you like what I do here, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking and sharing the videos. It really does help. And if you did this with your favorite YouTuber as well, I'm sure they would appreciate it as much as I do.